Hello and welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut, episode 47 this week. And I'm going to start by Jaguar XJC, which is a project that viewers from some time ago might remember. This has actually changed owners quite a while back. Another of our customers bought it. And we'd had a few niggles with idling from cold, a few little just niggles in traffic, things like that. When electrical loads change a little bit, the idle control wasn't brilliant. We're running an aftermarket ECU on it, and having now done more LS3 engine installations, we found that actually we prefer to just use the GM controller package, and that's much better for a car that's being used a lot in traffic and where absolute power and tunability doesn't necessarily matter too much. That the standard GM controller is much easier to work with and much nicer and much more user friendly. And so we're converting this over to the same GM controller that we use on that we've used on the other builds. In fact, on the two Mercedes builds that are also owned by the owner of this car now. So that's what's happening with that. That's more or less finished now. That's a bit that Carl's been working on, getting the ECU installed and the GM controller loom installed and getting all that up and running. That's now up and running, so I think that's going to be being test driven very soon. Marching on a little bit. It's a lovely car, that, by the way. There's more to come XJC wise from Retropower, so watch this space on that one. It'll be a while yet, but there's more to come. Then I'll stop by Utah. This is really coming together quite well now. James has been very busy on this, doing lots of small jobs that sort of don't appear an awful lot on camera, but are extremely important. A lot of sublooms. You may remember that Bremax make the core wiring loom, the main loom for the car, but then we create sublooms for a lot of the extraneous parts. So the stereo installation and speakers obviously aren't part of the main car loom. So James has been sorting out the subloom for the speaker installation, getting the speakers installed and finalising the parcel shelf ready for trim, and getting a couple of other parts finished off ready so for the final push on trimming pieces. We've got the door cards back now, but from Dean, but we've still got to do the A-pillar internal trims and the parcel shelf. So James has been finalising those bits because of the speaker installation, getting the wiring sorted there. Yeah, he's got the stereo wiring finished. He's also fitted and wired up and checked the reversing and rear view camera that's fitted under the rear of the car, the rear lighting loom for the number plate lights and the main rear lights on the car there. That's all done. And then he's also then been doing the finishing and operating and testing all the final parts of the door builds, the central locking, which has been a fairly protracted job because these cars were not designed in any way really to have central locking fitted. So there was quite a lot of work in getting that to work nicely and be hopefully reliable. So he's been working on that, getting the sublooms done for the locking motors in the doors and the locking motor for the boot lid, getting all that finished off. He's also then been finishing off the dashboard wiring. He did a little while ago the subloom for various parts of the dash, but he's been going through that and fault checking and power checking all of the dash installation and all the loom involved with that, making sure that's all operating correctly, which I believe it is. And then got the door frames, because the door frames have been out of the doors for the final part of fitting all the locking mechanisms and that side of things. So he's got all those back into the doors, got all that realigned, everything correct in terms of shuts. So that's really pretty much getting there in terms of the technical bits on the doors, which then means we can actually get the trim put in place, and then it's going to start coming together in terms of interior. So yeah, watch this space. That's all looking very nice now. Moving on, we're going to go past, there's various bits of progress on various things. Actually, I'll quickly touch on the Mustang. There's a little bit happened on that. John's been working on the fuel filler on the Mustang, getting that fitted into the rear panel, modifying that to fit with the tank, making sure it all fits properly because it didn't really originally. So he's done well with that. That's about ready to, that's pretty much ready to be fitted now. Now it's been reshaped somewhat and re-welded. So that's a little bit of progress on that, but there's various bits of progress been happening on some other cars sort of behind camera at the moment. We'll touch on that probably next week or the week after when a little bit more's happened. At the moment there are lots of little separate jobs that don't really add up to anything that's really worth talking about too much. So we'll wander on and move around to next door, and we'll go back into what's been happening on the Golf front back there when we've got a little bit more to show. Wandering through to the fabrication shop. or limping through to the fabrication shop, because I seem to have passed the new location for the air compressor, because we've changed all the air mains in the building now as well, and put a central air main through the middle of the building just to make the air runs shorter, and so we've got a better air supply for the bits of equipment that use lots of air. Right, I shall stop here by the Land Cruiser. We've been blitzing this pretty heavily since, as you'll remember from last week, we blasted it. We found a few horrors. I think it's the first time I've looked at the car that we've had here and been pretty convinced there wasn't a lot of rot in it, and discovered that there was a lot more than we thought. There was a lot of very, very skillful filler work had been done over a lot of rust on this car, which is a bit disappointing, but I can't say it's unique because we've seen it all before. It's just that on this one it did actually fool us, mainly because the engine bay had never been painted. So I was fairly sure that there couldn't be too much hiding elsewhere because the engine bay was in such good condition. But anyway, there we go. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, so we're dealing with it now. As you remember, it was blasted last week. We've been going through and working out what panels are required, what we're going to fabricate, what we're going to buy in. It's having a complete offside quarter panel bought in. It's having we're fabricating, I believe we're fabricating the rear body cross member. It's having a lower half quarter this side. I don't know if we're making that or buying that. I think we're buying that in actually. We're making the floors because it's having bespoke fuel tanks, it's having a saddle tank arrangement, well, 2 tanks with a cross feed arrangement. With a Venturi pump on the fuel return to draw the fuel to one side, to the main tank on one side where the pump draws from. So we're fabricating the floors to accommodate those tanks, and then Scott and Tom have both been on with this week, blitzing the initial rot repair, braced up the rear tub so that can't move. Tom's been working on sorting out how to fit the new floors, doing the repair work on the bottom of the A posts, making the new toe boards and getting them all tied in. I'm just looking around the front, but yeah, getting those tied into the front outriggers, cleaning up and prepping and tidying up and repairing the central outriggers there. Scott's been repairing the, I don't exactly know what you'd call it, the seat box outrigger, I guess you'd call it, or the front edge of the boot floor in front of the wheel arch. The outrigger there was rotten, so he's repaired that. He's repaired the top of one of the B posts. We've got to do the top of the other B post. There's various repair work to do at the top of the rear door aperture as well, and we're going to put a complete new boot floor in it as well. It's not particularly great, it's had a few repairs in it, so that's going to be completely replaced. We're making the floor pans because of the fuel tank arrangement, so I think Scott's knocked up a press tool, or either Scott or Tom, I'm not quite sure who, has knocked up a press tool to press the requisite sections into the floor pans for the work we're going to do there. The seating arrangement's being changed quite a lot in this anyway, so then we've got to look at modifying the mounts for the seats and building the transmission tunnel to match all that as well. That's another section that we'll probably be getting onto next week. It's starting to, once the floors are fabricated, then we can start work on designing and working out how to fabricate the transmission cover and get on with that and mating that into the modified bulkhead. So yeah, lots of rot repair, not all of it foreseen at the beginning of the project, but that's pretty standard in this line of work. I just didn't see it coming on this one. So yeah, watch this space for lots of grinding, lots of welding, and lots more filling in of large holes in a Land Cruiser. Stu's been busy on the Morris Minor. As has been the case from the very start on this, it's a tiny car and we're trying to fit an awful lot of things into it, and it's incredibly tight. So at the very initial stage, I'm recalling back to just a little over 12 months ago when I first drew the chassis up for this. It was very tight then, we were working within like 10 mil of, are the seats going to fit at all or not? And that's an MX-5 seat, which is pretty small. It's extremely tight for everything to fit. So Stu's been dealing with the unenviable task of making the heater, because it's also going to have air conditioning. Making the air conditioning and the heater water bulkhead fittings pass through the bulkhead in a pleasing way that doesn't foul or cause any rubs on any of the pipe work, that looks neat and doesn't foul anything. And there's not very often you hit the sort of problem we had in this car, which is the clearance between the back of the stereo and the rear of the water outlet on the cylinder head was such that regardless of where the bulkhead was in between the two, the actual path to get the fittings into place means we've actually got to use shorter fittings than we initially had. And even then, it's literally that's the space we've got. We're literally fitting a fitting between the engine and the back of the stereo, and that's the limiting factor. This is how tight it all is in there. So Stu's been working on that. He's made a little dish structure, I'd call it, that the bulkhead fittings go through for that. He's then moved on to working on a cradle, which is just sat on the bench over there, for the fuel pump and fuel filter arrangement. And again, because some of the shapes in the car are a bit organic, that's quite fiddly, but that sits up under here, in this where the chassis flares out to the rear subframe, and we've got a nice bit of space here. Now structurally this is all good, but it's not ideal in terms of packaging. But Stu's made a cradle that fits up inside here, which is the space we were allocating to the fuel pump and filter. But obviously it's in a slightly organic shape it's got to fit into. But he's made a cradle that goes up in there now that will the fuel outlet fittings come out of a recess above the subframe here, which is formed into the boot floor. And the pipes will come out of there into that cradle, and then from that cradle then travel down the side of the chassis on threaded inserts to the front of the car. So he's been working on that. The heating and ventilation bulkhead fitting sort of passage section at the front. And he's also been fitting the seat belts. We put a bit of structure into the inner quarter panels because there's not really anything to attach seat belts on. Anything to attach seatbelts to on a Morris, there's just not a facility, and there's not really any parts of the shell that are structurally strong enough to do that with. So we've created some, which we would have covered on an earlier video, some sections inside the inner quarter panels that the seatbelts will attach to structurally, and that will take our estimated crash loadings. You know, I haven't done, it's not been crash tested, but there's a limit when you're building a one-off car. You have to work on some basic numbers of the forces those components are likely to see, and then make some reasonably educated guesswork based on a reasonable engineering background, which is sort of my role really. So I've made some reasonably educated guesses on the structural loadings for those, and we made some structures that are in the quarter panels. Now Stu's been making the seatbelt assemblies to fit to those sections, and that's all gone quite well. We've got to add a little bit of a loop onto the seats to keep the belt close to you, because as it is, the belt's going to, because the mounting point is quite far back, it'll be a bit of a pain to grab the belt. So we're going to create some little retaining loops on the seats so that the belt's handy to grab when you get in the car. We don't want to fit harnesses. Lots of people are just, it's an easy answer, fit harnesses. They're horrible to use in a road car. They're just, you can't reach anything, you can't lean forward. When you go and try and get a ticket at a toll somewhere or something, you can't reach it. They're just a pain. So we wanted inertia reel belts, and that's now sorted. Stu's on top of that. So yeah, he's progressing well through that. Swinging round, let Jack manoeuvre his camera around briefly, but over there's a selection of the wings from the Chevette, which that's the only bit of bodywork progress that we can show you really this week, which is because the rest is it's top secret stuff, but he's wrapped the inside of the Chevette wings so that they're now ready for blocking on the outside, I believe, and then final paint on the outside, so that they can then go on when the car comes back. Obviously that's, as you know from last week, that's down at Simpson Race Exhaust at the moment, having the exhaust manifold and system built. So that'll be back, then we can start on putting bits like that together. Well, we can start putting the car together basically in full, regardless of just the bodywork. So that's where that's at. And then the reason I've been trying to get my head around everything is I've not been doing anything on any cars this week at all. I've been doing build a nat. We've been in next door, and last week we would have you'd have seen the turmoil that occurred when I dug down into running sand 8 feet down, trying to put our in-ground lifts in. Well, following that, we concluded that we're going to abandon the idea of in-ground lifts, which is very annoying. We wanted in-ground lifts, but it's a pretty major and extremely expensive civil engineering job then to fit those lifts to a standard that we'd be happy with. I mean, there are ways of doing it and throwing a lot of concrete in a hole and just sitting it in there, but if that all starts to sink at some point in the future, we've spent an awful lot of money to have a lift we can't use. So we concluded that the best way was to cut our losses on that. James Everard Garage Equipment, I can't praise highly enough. We bought the lifts used from him with newly fabricated floor mounting cassettes. He's agreed to take them back for the same money we paid for them and supply us with some surface mounted baseless rotary lifts, brand new. which are about the same money as the other ramps where second hand, because the in-ground ones are a lot more expensive, new. So he's agreed to do that. Can't recommend them enough. Everard Garage Equipment, extremely good company to deal with. So we're now recasting a section of the floor. We had a concrete delivery. We've filled in the half of the initial hole that was dug. Now we're going to do a second pour in a week's time to completely fill that hole up to the floor slab, the bottom of the floor slab level. In the meantime, we've marked out and dug out, cut out and dug out the hole for an inspection pit that we're putting in, because we're putting in a short 4-metre inspection pit just to make shakedown work a little bit easier to check up on when we're doing the sort of end of assembly shakedown work on new builds. We can quickly swing them in over a pit and just double check things with the weight of the car on the wheels. So we've dug out the hole for that. The pit was delivered incredibly quickly by Nick at MNG Fabrications. That was a week turnaround from order to pit being delivered. Again, I can't praise him highly enough, so efficient. So he's dropped that off. We've dug the hole to his drawing, welded on, we've used some old pallet racking beams as they were scrap and lying around and made sense. Made some plasma cut some eyes for the end of them, welded them onto the beams, welded the beams along the top, cleaned up, welded the beams to the top of the pit, 4 of them. So then we can drop the whole pit down into its hole, bolt those down. They're bolted down with 16mm through bolts to the floor, 8 of them. You think that sounds a bit excessive. The interesting bit is the weight of the pit, which is about 1.5 tons, hanging on those, it's all 5mm steel, it's about 1.5 tons, hanging on those beams, doesn't really deflect them at all. The reason for the beams being there is to stop the updraft, is to stop the lift. When you pour the concrete, the buoyancy on that pit, it's obviously extremely buoyant in concrete being 2.4 times as dense as water. The updraft's enormous, so it tries to lift the pit out of the ground. And it's interesting, and it's actually put a slight bow in those beams. The uplift is enormous, but anyway, it's set now. The first pour is done. We've got 500mm of the concrete's 500mm up the pit now. We've got about 250mm below the pit. That was all poker vibrated in. 500mm up the side of the pit. The next pour, we're going to take another 600mm of concrete up the side of the pit. And then the final pour will be about another 400mm at the top, which will be fibre reinforced as well. Just overkill, but I like to make sure everything's super strong. So that'll be the pit installation finished. In the meantime, we're also going to, once the other hole filling pour is done, we're then going to pour the remainder of the floor slab for the new ramps to go on. That'll be week after next, beginning of week after next, we're going to pour that floor slab so that we've got that can harden off, and then we'll get the lifts installed early August, all being well. So that's where we're at in there. So yeah, lots of hole digging, hauling away spoil. We've probably moved, I would guess, around 25 tons of rubble and clay and sand out of the building. Dug a lot of big holes and filled things with concrete. Had a bit of a disaster, but we've found a way around it. So watch this space. There'll be lots more civil engineering on the next video, I should imagine. So yeah, good to see everybody, and like and subscribe, and we shall see you soon.
Strenuous physical exercise.